Hi everyone, Brian here, wishing you a great Monday and a wonderful week ahead. We've been looking at some of the earliest characters in the New Testament in order to understand that the stories of New Testament characters are very similar to the stories of characters we've seen and heard throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. We've come to understand, I hope, that the authors of the Hebrew Scriptures, and now we'll see the New Testament Christian Scriptures, wrote for a whole bunch of reasons. Perhaps at the top of those reasons was to tell the history of the people of faith and to pass on understandings that people had about who God was and how God interacts with a covenant people. However, we've been introducing a third stream to that writing, and one that I believe is very potent and powerful and that unites all of the other kinds of readings, whether they're poetry or history texts or whatever else they may be, that they're united in this one thing, that they are telling the story of what it means to be a human being with a soul. That the soul is a place that connects us not only to the joy, beauty, and vivacity of the life we're experiencing in the here and now, in the physical, but also to the author of life, the meaning of life, the zest of life, and the depth and mystery of life, knowing that our soul connects not only to our conscious minds, but also to the conscious mind of the divine, the creative, hope-filled mind of the divine as well. And we've seen that beginning with Abraham through all sorts of characters throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. We've already looked at a few characters in the early pages of the Gospels of Matthew and a little bit in Luke. But before we go on to look at other characters in the New Testament, of course we have to take a look at the central character of the entire New Testament, and that is Rabbi Jesus of Nazareth. What was it about Jesus that sparked the interest and attention of so many people? I think that question has been at the heart of so many Christian lives for so long. Clearly it was a question even in the hearts and minds of his own disciples. They did not comprehend at first the meaning of his mission and ministry. They were looking at him and seeing what he did and listening to what he taught and how he interacted with people and how he gathered people into community with each other. But they saw it through the lens of the anticipated Messiah. They saw it in their own time and place, living as oppressed Jewish people under the tutelage of, at that time, the Roman Empire, which had a very firm thumb right on the top of all its subject peoples. And while there was some opportunity under the Roman Empire, what you can only imagine how oppressed monotheists who cared about their freedom felt under an oppressive polytheistic imperial regime. And so it was through that lens, what is the Jewish Messiah that we're looking for, and how can that Messiah liberate us from the current horrid conflict of being an oppressed people living under the regime of a pretty dreadful Roman conqueror. So they looked at the miracles, they looked at how he fed the 5,000, they looked at how he amazed them from time to time, but they looked at him as though all of this was going to very shortly turn into political strategy and military leadership. That at any moment, once he'd done this groundwork, Jesus was going to turn it into a political movement, a social movement, and very likely take on the leadership, kind of like George Washington did it, the American Revolution, and organized that social movement into a very real military campaign that would oust Roman forces from at least Jerusalem and Judea, and perhaps as much of the rest of that region as they could liberate. We know this because that's exactly what zealous messianic hopefuls did just a few decades after Jesus lived and died in and around Jerusalem. They actually gathered that social momentum together, organized a military response, and had some initial success ousting the Roman legions from Jerusalem. The outcome, of course, was that the larger military power of Rome and its intent to keep its empire intact met a very severe response, and Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 AD. Not unlike we can see the interests of Russian imperial power trying to crush the independence of Ukraine right now, for example. So Jesus' disciples, though, kept waiting for him to do the same thing, and he never did. And this became increasingly confusing and frustrating, and even as these disciples were trying to search for what it really was that Jesus was trying to get across to them, they knew there was something there that drew them. And it's that search for that something that has, I think, inspired people for generations since. For me, and you know what's coming, for me, what's coming is that Jesus perfectly united within him that voice of the soul with the other parts of his humanity. You'll remember that we've said the voice of the soul, the voice of the divine to our consciousness, has 3 stages to it. The first is comfort. The second is struggle to understand the meaning of how God is actually at work in this concrete universe that was created at his initiative. And then finally, how to share that with the world. But we've seen in every character before, and we're going to see in every character after Jesus, human beings who struggle with this, who have moments when they're open to this 3-part system, and other times when it just falls away and they can't hold on to it anymore. Hopefully, we're going to see after Jesus more and more people who are attentive to embracing of and nurturing this 3-fold soulful system. But we have to acknowledge that that's what it's about. It's not about getting into heaven. It's not about a whole new set of laws, not the old Hebrew laws, but a whole new set of Christian laws to replace the old. It's not about sacraments or the hierarchy of the church or a certain interpretation of the Bible. It's about being with this amazing man who lived the voice of the soul and the voice of the everyday self, always together, not either or, but both and, in everything he did, everything he spoke, and every way he interacted with the people around him. So I'm going to begin with the trust that we have in Jesus, the ideal reality of what it means to live, not just have moments, but to live the reality of the impression, the inspiration, the liveliness of the voice of the soul interacting with our minds, with our bodies, with our everyday interactions with the world we share with others. That Jesus represents a human being who perfectly, this is what the ancient theologians said, he lived without sin. That's what he lives without this kind of separation. We don't. There's no way. Even the saintliest among us cannot seem to hang on to the voice of the soul all the time. I've had the joy of meeting 2 or 3 people over the course of my lifetime who've actually, at least at the end of their lives, come very close to this. And perhaps we'll tell you some of those stories as this series goes on and we look at some other New Testament figures. But it's pretty clear to me that none of us lives this way all the time. The point of a spiritual journey, at least for Christians, is to live this way more and more and more. And that we can do. And that's what Jesus is really nurturing and encouraging in us. Jesus put up with some pretty dunderheaded disciples, some pretty dumb followers, some very disappointing followers, and did it with a lot of grace. I just want to point out he went through these 3 steps. Baptism in the River Jordan. That's why it's so important to the author of the Gospel of Mark. Where does he begin his Gospel? With the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan River. What happens there is the same thing that happened for Abraham halfway on that journey from Ur all the way around to Canaan after his father had died. He gets a message from God that says, "You are beloved to me, and all will be well." That is the message. The Gospels tell a different story slightly about who actually hears this voice coming from the heavens. But it's perfectly clear that in every instance, Jesus hears it. And so we have this initial stage where the first phase, the initial phase of being in touch with the divine, Jesus just gives us as an outward and visible sign at his baptism. It's not to say this is the first time he heard it, but all of Jesus' life is a sacrifice so that on his part, so that we can see this work of the Holy Spirit in him. So his opening gambit is, "You are my beloved Son, in you I am well pleased." That first step, I am with you, I love you, and I will care for you. What happens immediately? Immediately Jesus is sent out into the desert and struggles with the devil in terms of what is power, majesty, joy, what is the work of God in the world. And Jesus, again, is always listening for the mystery of the divine, whereas Satan is always presenting the wisdom of the world. Here's power, here's release from pain, and giving really very sensible solutions to the problems that are facing Jesus. But Jesus, again, like every figure we've seen, has to unite with the mystery of how God comprehends these moments to be. And when Jesus does, the extraordinary thing occurs that this is a sign, and we get to see what that struggle is like. Then third, what does Jesus do after? He then immediately goes and begins to share this truth with the world. So we can see right in the very first acts of Jesus' adult ministry what we've been talking about over the course of this whole series, looking at Jewish figures in the Hebrew Scriptures. It's exactly the same pattern, and it's right there. What Jesus is doing is showing the world what it's like to have in alignment the voice of the soul alongside the voice of our everyday selves that are so busy with the world in which we live. So let's see that rhythm there, understand that rhythm, and we'll look more at the life of Jesus to see that he's living this way in an outward and visible way so that the world can see what's not just what's going on in Jesus, but what can go on in us more and more and more. So thanks for listening. Have a great Monday and stay tuned. We'll continue to look at some New Testament figures as this series continues.